Tom, so we can't hear you.
Turn that down.
Tom, so we can't hear you. Okay, Tom, I'll just give a general call out and
Okay, morning everybody, welcome to Sunday morning's live stream of South Dublin Radio Club's 40 metre net. Sorry, I had a bit of audio difficulty there. I had a few tabs open on the computer and everything was feeding in, so sorry for the distortion and the audio annoyance there. Yeah, so my name's Adrian. My call sign is Echo India 9 Hotel Alpha Bravo. That's my radio call sign, and I'm a member of South Dublin Radio Club. And what we're doing this morning is we're going to live stream what we call the radio net. So radio clubs pretty much everywhere have these radio nets where members call in and kind of get together on air. There's a few reasons for that. There's the social aspect, of course, where people with similar interests are getting together and having a chat, but they're also checking their radio equipment with each other and talking things radio, I suppose. So our own club has nets throughout the week. Most of the nets are on what's called 2 meters, which is VHF. And if these terms are throwing you a little bit, if you're new to radio, don't worry about that. I'll go through it later on. But the VHF net is local. It's based around a repeater, which is an antenna on a local hill that can get signals over the hill so people can talk to each other. This 40 metre net's a bit different. This is on what's traditionally called shortwave or HF, and it's there's much more scope for longer distance communications, international or over longer distance locally here in Ireland. So the idea is that the net has a controller, so usually the first person to come on, and then they take in calls from people who are calling into the net. And because it's radio, it means that anyone who hears the net can call in anywhere around the world, really, if your signals get out that far. And that's the idea. So we have a club call sign. It's Echo India 2 SDR, South Dublin Radio Club, or Sierra Delta Romeo in the phonetic alphabet. So we'll use the club call sign today to indicate that it's a club activation. So that's kind of the basic premise of a radio net. So as the morning goes on, you'll see the kind of general pattern of the radio net, how it works. There's only myself on this morning, and there's 2 other club members, Tom and Tony. You'll get their call signs later when we're talking. But usually as the morning goes on, more and more people call in. It depends on conditions as well. Shortwave is notoriously fickle. From a radio conditions point of view, they can be good or bad, or middling, and that can determine how many people can join the net. But it's also one of the fun things about radio is that the conditions play a huge part in, I suppose, the game of amateur radio. So what I'll do is, as we're going along, I have a presentation on kind of standby. So if you're new to amateur radio, I'll do a quick presentation on amateur radio. We have the live chat on the side. So I think Tony, one of the club members, is keeping an eye on that as well if I don't get to it. So if you have any questions about amateur radio, you can put them in there. And then obviously when I do the presentations, there might be a few questions. I know there is 4, I think, viewing at the moment. But when we did this last time we did this a few months ago, there was a few viewers at the start, but it kind of increased. So if you want me to go back over something, or if something comes up again, we'll go back over it. And we'll cover aspects that way. What else? So as we go on through the morning, what I'll do is I'll explain different things that are going on, or if you're not clear on what's going on, just pop in a question. So on the screen at the moment, obviously there's three things. There's me, obviously, and there is a camera on my radio, which is this radio here, and the radio is a Yaesu FT DX3000, and it's a HF transceiver. What's a transceiver? It's short. It's a kind of condensed word for transmitter receiver. So it transmits and receives radio signals. This radio is specifically for what's called a HF transceiver. So it's for shortwave. So it transmits on the radio bands from 3 megahertz to 30 megahertz, and it also has the ability to transmit on a lower portion of the VHF band, which is the 50 meter band. So it's a kind of a mid-range radio, but that's the radio anyway. So it's just in case people are new to amateur radio, want to know what these things look like. That's what it looks like. I've other stuff here of this camera. I'll go around the equipment later on. But what we'll do is I'll jump back into the radio net, stop me talking for a while anyway, and then we'll come back out and have a chat again. Okay, so yep, it's a bit awkward. I have I have another camera on the desk, so I have to kind of reach over it.
That's what Adrian wants to do. If he wants to come on with us, or if I don't know.
So that's Tom there, EI7HT, and he's wondering what I'm doing, so I'm going to go back into the net.
And we can watch that, or is he coming onto this? Will he connect it live at a particular time? And I don't know. It's probably more testing he's doing at the minute. And just send him a quick text then. Is he going to come on with us? What do you call it? Will you put the link onto Zoom? We'll all mute and just watch what's going on there. Send him a text message there if he has time to read it. Back to you, Tony.
EI9HAB.
Okay. Okay, Adrian, Echo India 9 Hotel Alpha Bravo, Echo India 7 Golf Uniform Bravo. Go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, EI7HT from EI9HAB. I am coming back into the net. No, sorry, it's up and running on YouTube now. So I was just chatting to the viewers there into the camera, just giving a little setup of what was going on. I don't know if yourself or Tom can see YouTube, because of a few outputs now going, so I just want to get a kind of feedback to see how things are running, if it's coming through on YouTube. Okay, over.
Yeah, okay, Adrian. Echo India QSTR, Echo India 7 Golf Uniform Bravo to South Dublin is from there. Yeah, all fine, all working well, sounds good as well. Everything is working fine for you, Adrian. I'm just watching it here on the side on another device. So back to you, Ollie.
Yeah, EI7GUB from EI9HAB. Yeah, thanks, Tony. I was just double checking. Sometimes you don't know. It looks fine from this end as well. I had a bit of an audio problem at the start, but that was my fault because I had it open on. I was watching it on YouTube as well, and everything was feeding back, and it became a little bit of an echo chamber mess. No, but I was just talking to the YouTube viewers there about what the radio net is and what the idea of it is every Sunday morning for people calling in, and the fact that we have a 2 meter net as well, but this is just slightly different on a Sunday. So we'll see how it goes. I know we've 3 viewers at the moment. I know one of those is you now, Tony, so that's fine. But the last time, it took a little while, I think, for people just to come on. Um, but maybe not so many this time. It's August, and I think a good few people are away by the looks of things. Um, but sure, it's good to try these different things anyway. Over.
Okay, no problems at all. Echo India 7 Golf Uniform Bravo, returning on the South Dublin Radio Summit. Yeah, fine indeed. No, it's working well. It sounds good, and I have it here on a tablet here beside me, and I'm just trying to figure out how I can share it on Zoom, so I'll shoot that down in a second this side. But sounding very good this side at the moment anyway. And I don't know if you want to use the troop calls on yourself, that's up to you. I'll leave it in your hands. But yeah, no, working 100%. Okay, follow over to Tom there. Echo India 7 Hotel Tango, Echo India 7 Golf Uniform Bravo, with the South Dublin Radio Summit, will you?
Yeah, okay, Tony, from the I-7 HT there. Okay, the only thing I'm thinking of there is that we have the radio on, so with the audio from that, we Zoom on and we have the audio, and then we're going to have audio coming there from Adrian's YouTube. So it is worth to cut the audio back somewhere, or we're going to have a whole load of echo there. So back to you on that one, Adrian, from EI7HD.
Yeah, EI7HT from EI9HAB. Yeah, no worries, Tom. I suppose there's no need for you to be running YouTube if it's distracting for you. It's going out fine, because it is a little bit distracting, I suppose, for you guys if you're watching YouTube and listening to me on the radio as well, because there is a significant enough delay. So I wouldn't be, too worried, because if you've got Zoom there as well. That's fine. Just for people watching, that they know the club actually is on. Some of the members are on Zoom at the same time, as they're either on or not on the radio. It depends on their location, but it just means they can come into the club. But no, I wouldn't worry too much about YouTube at your end. It seems to be going out fine. So back to you, Tom. Over.
Yeah, okay, fine on that then. Okay, that's grand. Right. Okay, no, whatever's the best for you now, and for whatever length of time you're going to be on, it's just 9:45 now. So there's yeah, I'm easy on it anyway. There, I can mute myself at any time there, whatever, no problem there, and we keep one ear on the radio. And one eye on the Zoom. So that's it. Right, okay, Tony, back to you there. EI7GB from EI7HC and Company.
Yes, okay, Echo India 7 Hotel Tango, Echo India 7 Golf Uniform Bravo, with the South Dublin Radio Summit. Yeah, fine indeed, and all 100% anyway, audio and all crystal clear, and just listening here. On 2 devices, so there you go. Okay, QRZ, CQ 40 meters, Echo India 7 Golf Uniform Bravo. CQ 40 meters, Echo India 7 Golf Uniform Bravo with the South Dublin Radio Subnet. Any other stations by QRZ 4 meters, 40 meters even. So many bands in running. Okay, QRZ, Echo India 7 Golf Uniform Bravo listening. Quite at the moment. I think it's going to be a little bit like that. I see the RSTB now are starting their news. Obviously, I see it on the waterfall here. So I'd say they'll be busy now over the next hour. Okay, back to you. Echo India 7 Hotel Tango, Echo India 7 Golf Uniform Bravo with the South Dublin Radio Summit, honey.
Okay, Tony, fine on that. Yep, but 9:46 now at the minute.
So CQ there was, what do I mean by CQ? Tony there was calling CQ. It's a kind of a radio term for calling out for any listeners to see if anyone wants to join the net. So that when Tony was saying CQ, it's like saying attention, attention, or it comes from the old Morse days, I suppose. And he was saying there that it looks a little bit quiet at the moment, radio-wise, but also the National Society in the UK, the RSGB, their news broadcast is on at the moment, so probably a lot of the UK stations will be listening to their national broadcast, because we do get a few call-ins from the UK on a Sunday morning. Generally when that's over, if they want to call in, they will then. So what I'll do is I'll do a quick tour of what's on screen at the moment. So apart from the camera on myself on the radio, what you're seeing here is what's called a software defined radio waterfall. And what it does, it demonstrates a slice of the radio spectrum. And I'll just mute the guys there for a sec. So I'll show this in a little presentation later on. The amateur radio, the radio frequency is broken up into sections called bands, and people who are amateur radio operators like myself, the amateur radio community is allocated sections of the spectrum, and they're called bands. It's just banded basically. And this one is called the 40 meter band, and it's called 40 meters because the wavelengths at this particular portion of the radio spectrum are 40 meters long. And it's basically 40 meters is one cycle or one wave, the frequency of it. And in particular, the frequency we're here is at 7123 kilohertz, or 7.123 megahertz, or 7,123 kilohertz, whichever way you want to slice and dice that one. So the 40 meter band corresponds to roughly 7 megahertz, and this is the area of the amateur band that we're on. So the portion of the spectrum that we're allocated here is from 7 kilohertz, or 7 megahertz, sorry, up to 7.2 megahertz. So from here to here, okay. Now up to 7200, and above 7200 here, these are actually all commercial broadcasters, international shortwave commercial broadcasters, like your China Radio International, BBC World Service, that kind of stuff. So they're close enough to us. So this is why you have band allocations. It's to separate the different users, so we don't interfere with commercial operations and they don't interfere with us. And this is one of the reasons why you need a radio license, why it's a regulated entity, because the radio spectrum is obviously somewhat valuable real estate, and you have different interests using the radio spectrum. Obviously you've got commercial operators, you've got military operators, you've got and then ourselves, the amateurs. But obviously the commercial operators are given precedence on the military, but we're given our allocation, and that's where we stick to. And it's generally well observed. Of course, most of you've obviously heard the term radio pirates before. There are radio pirates and people who don't act or conform to the rules of being on air. So if we zoom in here, you can get a closer look at where we're transmitting at the moment. So as I said, we're broadcasting on 7123, and if we just turn up the volume for a sec, take off the mute.
We'll see what happens there, but it looks like maybe not much on 40s this morning, maybe so, but we'll keep trying, we'll keep listening, and see what happens.
So anyway, Tom's saying there, he's bemoaning the fact that there's not many people around, but we'll persevere. So as Tom was talking there, you can see his signal, right? And you can actually notice that the signal is to the left of this line. and that's called what we call lower side bands. So what do I mean by that? Well, when you transmit a radio signal, in the middle you transmit what's called a carrier wave, and that's the energy of the radio signal basically, and then the information is patched onto the carrier. Now normally, if you're not familiar with radio, if you think of like AM or FM, if you look at this, if you see how, well, maybe I'll go up to a broadcast band and have a look. 49 meters. Yeah, we'll have a look at this one. So you can see there very definitely in the middle, if we just go up to 0.5, I don't know what station that is, but anyway we'll have it. Anyway, it's music. You can see here in the middle, there's the carrier wave, okay, or the carrier, and on either side of the carrier is the information, okay, you can see it's just demonstrated here on the waterfall, that's the information that's modulated onto the carrier, and that's what we call a double side band. So basically there's two bands of information either side of the carrier. So when you're listening to your FM signal, it's much wider than that, but it's the same principle. It's patching information on either side of the carrier. But in amateur radio, we do use double side banded transmissions, but generally for like shortwave, what we're doing this morning, we use what's called single side band. So we only utilize one band of information, and that saves on power, and it just makes, we don't need the fidelity, we don't need to transmit high quality information as such, so our requirement to generate a powerful double side banded signal isn't required. So we use a single side band, and in the case of this morning we're using lower side band, which is to the left, if you know what I mean. So there you go. So that's 7123 there, but I'll talk a little bit about that later on again.
Right, okay.
We'll jump back in now.
Yeah, because he's also more interested in what Adrian is doing, and so that's it. Well, Tony, give a call.
What was I doing?
I thought Joe would be on at this stage. Message is now done, but maybe not. 5 to 10, and about 15 or 20 past 10, we should have noise from Colchester. So we'll see. QRZ, any other station is fine. QRZ. This is Echo India 7 Hotel Tango on the SDR net. Echo India 7 Hotel Tango calling QRZ.
EI9 HAB.
Yeah, go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. No, I was just doing a little quick run through of the SDR and the radio spectrum there, just for people watching. So yeah, I think it looks like it's pretty quiet this morning. Maybe everyone's still on holidays, but I see Jer and Jeffrey are in the chat talking to each other about antennas, which is good. Thanks, Jer, for picking up on the questions. I was saying that to the lads earlier on when you're doing this and the chat's going at the same time, it's difficult to multitask. I'm not a good multitasker. So I see Sandeep is in there as well, in the chat also, which is good. So we'll see how it goes this morning anyway. I suppose I was just going to reiterate to anyone listening as well, or watching, the whole idea this morning is for people to ask questions about radio, and I know most of those watching at the moment have a good idea of what radio is about, but if any newbies come along, but I'll do the presentation at some stage later on anyway, Tom, and we'll see how we go with that. Otherwise, that's fine. It's just Tony and yourself at the moment. I don't know if you got any other calls in. Tom, back to you, over.
Yeah, okay, fine on that. Yeah, okay. Sandy is out and about. He brought his son for the vaccine this morning. So he did. That's why he's out and about there. So what do you call it? Good to see him there. Good outdoor picture and all. So it is. And Joe Riley was on here with us, but he should be now there. What do you call it? He decided to switch over and see what's happening on YouTube. There. So that's grand. And our other show, Six Echo Golf, must be very busy this morning, and no sign of him yet. But it's only 2 minutes to 10 anyway. Anything can happen, so it can. So okay, that's grand. Everything is up and running there, right? Okay. So stay cool. Anyone there to make a cup of tea? So back to you, Adrian, there from EI7HT.
Yeah, EI7HT from EI9HAB. No, I'm up in the attic all on my own, Tom. There's no tea coming. Maybe I'll have to run away in a few minutes when the old throat gets a bit croaky. That's one thing they don't tell you about amateur radio actually when you start, is that you can dry up from talking too much over.
Yeah, true enough there. Yeah, I find it now of late. So I think it's probably the summer weather as well. And of course, if you're really interested in something, you do end up doing more, saying more, all that sort of thing. You know, so okay, not to worry. So I think my internet is stable now. I haven't got any reminder now in over half an hour. So that's that itself. So it looks like that the blackout that we had here last night was only local to us. So it wasn't any other, or three other few parts of Dublin, I think, you know. I haven't heard anyone to come in and say that they lost. No, there's no family members text me anything to say that it was off or wasn't. So that's it. So I got over all the usual things, re-sign in, new password, all that sort of thing. So I even found it yesterday evening there on different sites. There's a whole load of changes going on the internet now anyway, because Windows 11 is supposed to be on the way, and we're going to have to do things differently. So I think that's what's happening. Everyone has been getting everyone to change their password and move this and change that. We'll see. I'm sure you've experienced some of it yourself this week, Adrian. Back to you from EI7HT.
Yeah, EI7HT from EI9HAB. Not really, Tom. I haven't really got myself across all of that yet. But sure, if it's just another one of those modern life issues, I suppose. So what I might do is I might just go back on the side, Tom, for a second, and just do this little presentation about amateur radio, just for the YouTube thing, and then we'll come back into the net then once that's done, and we'll see how the questions go as well, if there's any. I know some of the guys on the chat anyway have got the upcoming exam, so it might be worth seeing if we can clarify anything they want clarified. Anyway, that's what I'm going to do now, Tom. Over.
Yeah, okay, fine on that, Adrian there. Okay, and I just got a message there from Sandip in the chat, and he's moved over to YouTube there. So yeah, you go ahead then, alright, there, because other people will be wondering what you're doing and what's next there. So no problem, get you later on there. and we'll hear you then when you're back. And so have a good morning there from EI7HD.
Yeah, thanks Tom, catch you in a while. So I'm just gonna mute that there. So okay, so that's Tom. That's his call sign's EI7HT. He's a stalwart of the club. He actually gets this net going every Sunday morning. Oh yeah, I see a question in from Sandeep. I'll get to that in a second, Sandeep, about the reception reports. So what I might actually do is I'll do that little presentation first, just for anyone who's watching, and about what amateur radio is, and then after that I'll get to Sandeep's question, and we'll see what gets thrown up after that. Okay, so I'm using OBS here, and I'm not really the fastest with it yet, I have to say. It's all new. So I'll go there. Okay. So this is a slideshow, just a little thing about what is amateur radio. Actually, we had this running on a loop at Dublin Maker in 2019. Jeffrey, there you go. It was on a screen. It's very basic. So if you already know what amateur radio is, this probably is not going to be that much use to you. This is more for those of you that have joined us and are uninitiated or want to know a little bit more. So, so what is amateur radio? Okay, basically we enjoy understanding how radio works. Okay, I need to do something here now. Transition. That's it. Yeah. So we need to understand how radio works, or enjoy how radio works, and communicating with others basically through radio. And a lot of us are into basically investigating the mysteries of long distance radio signal propagation. And that's a kind of just a picture of my own desk at the moment, with one of my kids who I've been trying to get into radio. So basically what we do, we're also called hams, or radio hams. That's if people hear of ham radio, amateur radio, ham radio, it's the same thing. And what we do is we experiment and operate with homemade and commercial radio equipment. And that includes the whole radio spectrum, so everything up as far as satellites and space stations. So because we have a radio license, basically it gives us permission to engage in the radio spectrum the way a passive user of radio spectrum can't. Okay, and there's actually amateur satellites up there at the moment. Believe it or not, there's people who, there's universities have a program called Fly My Satellite, or Fly Your Satellite, I think, where they get funding to build satellites and launch them. And there's other groups that self-fund and put up satellites. This is outside of any commercial stuff. It's just purely for the fun and the experimentation of it. And that picture there you can see at the moment is going to be Ireland's first satellite. It's going to be put up by UCD, a UCD team on a European Space Agency launcher, or from the space station in the next year or two. They haven't got a launch date yet. But even with this one, although this is a university kind of European Space Agency type project, they're asking the amateur radio community to help them out with signal acquisition after launch. So we could that's one thing about amateur radio. There are aspects of it where we do link in with other, say, partners or groups to help out with experimentation or science, or yeah, there's lots of different things we can get involved in, not just talking to each other on the radio. The whole area is actually quite vast, really. There's so much in radio you can get involved in. This is a picture of a recent contact with the International Space Station down in Athlone, Athlone Community College, and the kids got to talk to an American female astronaut. I can't remember the lady's name, sorry. And that whole contact was facilitated by Irish radio amateurs, by Shannon Basin Radio Club, who are similar to ourselves, a local radio club, backed up by the IRTS, which is the National Radio Society. And it's pretty amazing to think that people can do something like that on a voluntary basis, and get children speaking to astronauts live on the space station. It's a very inspiring thing to do. So that's one of the things we can do in amateur radio, is help promote science, technology, engineering and maths, as it's called these days, the STEM promotion thing. That was a very successful contact, actually. Like anything in radio, nothing's guaranteed, but that was very successful. And the kids got to ask lots of questions. It's a very slick operation. And then there's, like, at a basic level, if you're just coming into radio, and even if you don't have your radio license, you can do very basic things. This is a very simple antenna that I made up myself out of a coat hanger. And with the software defined radio you've seen on screen, you can actually decode signals from passing weather satellites. That's a NOAA satellite there, the National Oceanographic and Aerospace something or other, I think, in the States, or atmospheric department, the US government department that looks after oceans and kind of climate and that kind of stuff. They have satellites up there. And their satellites, the NOAA satellites, they're continually orbiting and scanning the planet in all sorts of wavelengths, infrared and all sorts. But you can actually download information from those satellites, or from a little antenna like that in your attic, and a little piece of software. And that's my latest pretty rubbish attempt at trying to download some weather images from NOAA. Clearly the antenna is very rudimentary, but it's just to show you that it can be done with a very rudimentary antenna. And the more you get into radio, the more then you could improve your reception capability. But like it's just interesting things like that all these signals are flying around your head and you can have fun with them. So we build and operate our own stuff. This is another element of amateur radio. That's a homemade AM radio. That was my first radio project when I joined the club. It's terrible, but it teaches you the principles of receiver architecture, like how a radio receiver works. It's a breadboard and a few components. This here, that's the ferrite coil antenna that you would see in any AM radio. That's one of the guys made this low powered transmitter. I can't remember who made that. And there's a transceiver, so a piece of equipment that can receive and transmit, and that's using an Arduino, those kind of boards you can buy. So amateur radio itself really is kind of the original, or one of the original science hobbies, I suppose, and as such it's always been utilising whatever the latest developments are, so right up to date, utilising the latest technologies. And there's a project that Kevin, his call sign's EI3EU, he did a thing for, we had a science festival online there, Dublin Maker, during, when was it, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, I can't remember. But he made a radio receiver out of basically bits and pieces you can find in the kitchen and your shed, and it was very successful actually. He got fantastic quality audio out of it. He made a variable basically capacitor out of tinfoil and inner tubes from kitchen towel, and this is garden wire. That's the coil antenna, and an old bell transformer. And so these are good little projects you can get your teeth into if you're starting out in radio. to understand how things work. This is from Keith, one of our other club members, and this is what it's called a Morse Keyer, where basically he can decode Morse code on it to help practice, and I think he can actually plug it in as well to receive Morse signals and decode them as well. He's very experienced. I can't do stuff like that, but that's the level people get up to anyway. But most of us actually really enjoy building antenna. That's my own antenna outside, the one that you've just seen me operating. It's a dipole on the side of the house. Low down enough. I know there was a question there in the chat about antennas. It depends on your location. You're allowed 6 meters above the ridge line as far as I know. But you know, antennas can be, it just depends on your neighbours. Some people like them, some don't. Some people just know what the situation is locally and keep them low down and stealthily enough. Or if you're out in the countryside, you can do whatever you want. You know, no one's going to say anything because you've got your own road frontage. But but there's different ways around these things. That's a loop antenna, which can be a very effective space-saving solution. And they're also they've got great gain in certain directions, so, or you know, whatever way it's orientated. Yeah, so again, you know, coat hangers, you know, people experiment all the time. That's a Moxon there at the bottom, I'd say, for 6 meters or something. But I'm just putting up examples of different types of antenna. And amateur radio people are always messing with antennas. That's part of the fun, because usually a lot of us start off on shortwave or maybe on VHF, and they're our first antennas. But then as we kind of, let's say, branch out further into the hobby, that necessitates different types of antenna. So that's where the experimentation with antenna comes in, or antennae, I should say. But most of us started out by listening, you know, listening to shortwave, or you know, just becoming interested in radio through listening to it. You can get a relatively cheap radio receiver that'll allow you to explore the vast radio spectrum. You don't need all this kit that I have around here at all to get started, and that's where I got started myself. And even a small portable radio like that is enough. And even if you have a radio like that is, you know, FM, shortwave, or AM, there's actually lots you can even do with those type of things these days. You can actually what you receive on them, you can decode on another device through software-defined radio, which is what you've seen on my own screen, SDR. And as you can see here, you could even get an SDR dongle, this little USB thingy here, and connect it to your phone and put the software-defined put the software on your phone, and get a small little whip antenna, and you're set up to go, and you have that whole visual spectrum display as well. Going back to the older type of, or the more traditional type of radio, I actually used one of these before, when the International Space Station sometimes sends these pictures via radio message. And what I did was, you can get a decoder on your phone and tune in the space station on the radio, and hold the phone up to the radio, and it actually decoded the images from the space station. So that was kind of funny. And I think I actually did that in a car at the time I was moving. But yeah, so there's different ways around things to have a bit of fun with radio. There's kind of weird stuff out on the radio spectrum. You'll hear stuff like, there's these spy stations called number stations. Some people are really into hunting those things down. If you just Google or if you just Google number stations, that's a whole area of radio mystery that people are sometimes fascinated by. No one admits to number stations, but they're generally thought to be run by intelligence agencies, or narcotics traffickers or whatever, but there's a whole story behind number stations, and when you scan around on the radio spectrum you hear all these very strange automated mechanical voices reading out numbers, but they're not only voice, they're digital and Morse as well, in Morse code. So it's just another thing that kind of spices up the radio spectrum, are these number stations. So yeah, they're kind of spooky, especially at night when you're listening to them on your own. The radio spectrum itself, so as I was trying to explain earlier on, the radio spectrum is vast. So where we're transmitting at the moment is in shortwave on the South Dublin radio net. Okay, but as you can see, that's only a portion of the radio spectrum. We have from very long frequencies all the way up to very, very high frequencies, and they're generally all utilised for different types of things, although there is some commonalities across them. But I'll get into the difference between shortwave and a lot of the rest of them. But as you can in a minute. But as you can see, shortwave is kind of used for longer distance communications. When you get to VHF upwards, basically they're using more spectrum width, or more broadbanded. That's where that term comes from, and that's where you find your TV signals and your FM radio and your satellite signals and all that kind of stuff. Basically, where there's more information being carried. MF, or medium frequency, is also called AM, or medium wave, in this part of the world, and long wave, and many of you would know those from RT radio long wave, or BBC radio long wave, or AM stations around Europe and America. And the VLF frequencies, there's a few things down there like radio beacons for navigation. At one stage it was used for transatlantic communication. There's a museum in Sweden, in Grimeton. We did a little lecture with those last year with those guys. At 17 kilohertz, I think, they used to transmit signals across the Atlantic Ocean through a network of stations. This is before they discovered shortwave, and I'll show you now in a minute why shortwave changed the game for international radio communication. So shortwave, or HF, this is how a lot of people get into amateur radio. The cool thing about shortwave is that the atmosphere can bounce certain radio frequencies off itself, or refract or reflect down, and it's from a region of the atmosphere called the ionosphere. So basically, when the sun shines on the Earth, on the atmosphere, it ionizes layers in the atmosphere, or electrically charges them, basically. And what that can do is, when you transmit signals at certain frequencies, and particularly on shortwave from 3 megahertz to 30 megahertz, there's a high probability at certain frequencies that those waves will be bounced back down. And what that enables you to do is to communicate over the horizon. So if you think of it this way, when you're listening to your FM station in your car, your local rock station or pop station or news or whatever, after about, I think it's about 70 kilometers or 50 miles, that signal begins to drop away. You can't hear it anymore if you're driving away from their transmitter, and that's because you're going over the horizon. And that signal is a VHF signal, and anything that's above 30 megahertz is generally line of sight. It won't curve over the planet. It will a little bit, and there's special conditions where it might bounce through the atmosphere, but I won't get into that. But in shortwave, you can reliably bounce signals off the atmosphere in most cases, and that's where you get this. You can get this national or international or transoceanic around the world communication, and that's what we're saying about that station in Sweden, that VLF station in Sweden. They didn't know about shortwave when that station was first built in the early 1900s, and then through experimentation, actually through a guy who lived in Ireland here, his name was Colonel Mead Dennis, was one of the first guys. They began to realise that if they went up higher in frequencies, they could actually bounce these signals further. And in actual fact, under certain conditions, your signal can bounce right the way around the planet and even back to yourself, which is pretty amazing. In other words, you can communicate around a sphere without the use of a satellite. And that's how communications went for a very long time after the discovery of shortwave. And then obviously when the space race started and that kind of stuff, satellites went up and communications improved. It was a higher quality than shortwave, but the original global communication system was shortwave communications. Outside of cables, they did have Morse cables running under the ocean from the mid 1800s, but that's not wireless to use that term. It was dependent on wires, obviously, but this is wireless communication we're talking about here, radio. And that's what my granny used to call the radio, the wireless, and now everything's wireless. So it was at those frequencies. So that said, depending on the state of the ionosphere, you can contact other radio hams anywhere in the world, and people do crazy things with radios. One of the things that amateur radio people like to do is activate various geographic locations, because it gets defined as a new area that's being contacted. So you get crazy what's called expeditions or de-expeditions. DX is distance in radio, and they go to little islands or rocks, as you can see here in the South China Sea, to say it's being activated from a radio point of view. And it's all about just getting out there and setting up your equipment and seeing what can be done. So as I said earlier, the higher frequencies are generally considered a line of sight. So this goes from everything from your mobile phones to TV, local TV signals, from masts and that kind of stuff. So as you can see, if it's a line of sight thing, you have a problem. In other words, how do you get around the curve? So, but all your modern, let's say, in modern life enabling technologies all live up above 30 megahertz. So your FM radio, your DAB, terrestrial TV, satellites, phones, Wi-Fi, GPS, they're all up there. And that's why you need masts. Because they're line of sight, you need something to get you over the hill. So that's, if you don't know much about radio, that's why when you drive around the countryside, you see all these towers, whether it's cell towers for phones or larger transmitting masts for, say up here in Dublin at Tree Rock, there's a lot of masts up on the hill, and that's why they're there. And radio amateurs, we have our own network of repeaters. As I said, we have our own masts around the country up on high locations to enable VHF and UHF radio communication for radio amateurs. That's the one up on Tree Rock. And in a lot of countries, actually, when you get your foundation license, in Ireland there's only one license, but in a lot of countries there's a graduated license system. Most people start off in that end of the spectrum with a cheap radio like this, a VHF radio, and that's one of these infamous or famous Baofeng Chinese radios. They're about 20 or 30 euro on the internet, and if you're licensed to use them, they're absolutely fine. They're a really, really great investment as a radio, and they can enable you to start off in amateur radio at a very, very reasonable price point. So yeah, so as I was saying earlier, if you're just joining us at the start, we actually have a 2 meter VHF radio net a few nights during the week, where people use VHF, and it's through that repeater on screen that you see there that it goes through. There's kind of more niche things. Some amateur radios operators bounce signals off the moon because they can, and it's called moon bouncing. And what they do is they use a particular type of antenna. They fire a signal at the moon, and either they bounce it back to a known receiver location, and yeah, it's just something people get into. But this brings, and that's the type of antenna that they would use. You can see much bigger ones as well. But people bounce signals off various things just for the hell of it. You can get a thing called airplane scatter, believe it or not. That obviously an aircraft are basically big aluminium tubes with engines strapped onto them, and with VHF, this type of thing, or I think any type of radio signals, I think, or any type of frequencies, you can get, there is an effect where as aircraft are passing over, as your radio signal strikes the aircraft, it's a metal surface, it'll scatter the signal, and you can get unusual radio propagation like that. I think it's more done by people who live under defined flight paths around certain, known routes where the aircraft come in low enough that they can bounce the signals off them. So I know some people have done it here around Dublin, because in the valleys in Wicklow you might not have great VHF communication, but some people can get unusual contacts by bouncing signals off passing aircraft. And you can also bounce signals off meteors that are coming in, and we had a lecture, you can see it on our YouTube channel, from a group called Nematode, who bounce signals off meteorites as they come in. You'll find that actual talk on our channel. And what they do is they use radio signals to track, to basically triangulate the position of the meteorite, and then they do it over a time series to see if they can get the trajectory of the meteorite and possibly its landing point. And it's a group of radio amateurs and and other radio hobby people, not necessarily licensed. And you can find their stuff on AstroShot there, 187 is Michael O'Connell. And they're always looking for people to collaborate with them. And actually this week was the Perseid meteor shower. So I'm sure they did a lot of work around that, because I think there was a lot of meteorites that came in over the week. I think it was quite a good pass. These annual meteor showers, by the way, generally what they are is the Earth passing through a comet's trail. I think the Perseids are the Swift-Tuttle comet. I think it's that comet. But throughout the year, the Earth passes through known trails where comets have passed, and that's where you get this deluge of kind of space debris or meteorites. So it's a very broad hobby. So whether it's figuring out how things work, like building your own things, designing, making, building antenna, radio equipment, learning about electronics is a big part of it, learning about software, radio operations, voice communications, digital communications, and even Morse code is very, very popular still. There's a lot to amateur radio. So so we're South Dublin Radio Club, that's our geographic area, but we're also available on Facebook and online, on Twitter, and every Tuesday night we actually have our club meetings at the moment on Zoom. So if you contact us through social media, you're more than welcome to come along. So there's something for everyone, really. So that's amateur radio in a very crude and basic way. And so 7-3, that means thanks and goodbye in radio speak. And that's our club call sign, is EI2SDR. And what our call signs, so EI is Ireland, Echo India. So if you ever look at the side of an Aer Lingus plane, it's always EI something. So that's the radio call sign. And then 2 is just a designation that's given out by Comreg, the regulator, to SDR. But you can request what they call vanity call signs for various special events or organisations. So South Dublin Radio Club. My call sign's Echo India 9 Hotel Alpha Bravo. That's what I got when I got my exam, and that's fine by me. I don't see any reason to change it yet. So that's South Dublin Radio Club. So what we'll do is I'll go to the chat and just see how things are there, and then we'll transition back there. Okay. Oh yeah, the floor bounce. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I've had that a few times as well, and cried. So I know Sandeep was asking about the oh yeah, how do you read, or how do you do that kind of reception report? So what Sandeep was talking about is yeah, it's a little bit subjective, I suppose, sometimes. So if you look at the so there's two elements to it, right? The radio reports. There's the readability and the signal strength. So if we go up here on the SDR, that's the signal strength. So that's 7. So that's where the 7 or that would be the second number. So what do I mean by that? So the first number is what's your readability, right? So readability is anything from it's unreadable, or there's 5 of those: unreadable, barely readable, readable with difficulty, readable with no difficulty, and then there's perfectly readable, which is the 5, right? So this whole 5/9 thing drives some people mad, like myself. Like most signals, so that's the first number, is the readability, and then the 1 to 9 thing is the signal strength. Now you really only look at that through your S meter, I suppose, or what your radio is telling you, and even then that's kind of subjective, because it's how well does your radio receive, or is it a true reflection? How good is your antenna? Okay, so if you had a high gain antenna and an antenna that receives very well, you may always get very strong signals in. I have a pretty broad-banded dipole antenna, so I get a mixed bag across a lot of different parts of the radio spectrum as to how well I receive. So if we listen maybe to
what do you call it?
Tom there now.
No, I didn't see it last week. No, I was away last week there.
So
I was down the country. I was down that lawn.
Okay, so bear in mind that's through the computer, okay, because it's through the SDR. So he's perfectly readable there, okay. So there's no problem understanding what he's saying. So that's a 5, right? And then if we go to the strengthometer, he's there. He's around a 7 or an 8. So he's 5 and 7 or 5 and 8. And actually, if we go down to my own radio here, just so we know that there's no discrepancy, it's reading between 5 and 7 and 5 and 8 as well. So that's where it comes from. Now, unfortunately, in practice, you'll often hear people give a 5 and 9. I think that's just people just want to shortcut the whole process. They're, look, I can hear you, I'm not getting into it. 5 and 9. But if you want good feedback on how you're transmitting, or how well your signals get out, you should be looking for a true signal report. And don't I won't get into naming certain cultures or regions. There's certain parts of Europe in particular where everyone just says 5/9, and it's of no use to anybody really, especially for someone like, say, for us out here in Ireland, say, transmitting into the continent, because we've a lot of atmosphere in the way. There's a lot of kind of weather stuff can interfere with the signal, so you really want to understand how well you're getting out. So in actual fact, like one of the more common reports that I would give out was probably a 4 and 4, which is kind of readable with no difficulty. I can hear them, but the signal is only fair. I can hear them, but it's kind of low enough on the strength side, and you can see that on the S meter. And if you keep an eye on the S meter here, this is the strength meter here, up at the top. You can see that there's a weaker station in there now. So we'll just see who that is. So that's another Tony in the club. He's 7 EI7JN. I just know his voice. He's not actually too far away from me, but that the issue is that the way my antenna is relative to his position, there's always a weak point in the antenna, or what we call a null in the antenna, where it's weaker. It's particularly with dipoles. So the dipole is this it's a two-legged antenna. It's got two wires coming off it, and it receives best broadband or side-on, okay, broadside, if you know what I mean. But it's weakest in line, if you know what I mean. So the way my antenna points to Tony is that he's right on that bearing where my antenna is weakest. So that's why I can't hear him that well. So I hope that helps, Sandeep. I think when you get into radio, my advice would be don't fall for the short form 5.9. It's not particularly useful, particularly when you're setting up your whole station and you want to understand how well you are getting out and how well you're receiving. So we'll go back to the net now and see how things are going.
Tom, so it's all back to you. Echo India 7 Hotel Tango, Echo India 7 Golf Uniform Bravo, the South Dublin Radio Club Network.
Yeah, okay. Well,
EI9 HAB.
Right, okay. So not to worry. There, it's was it 10:38 now. There, so we keep it going anyway. But what do you call it? I did have a look outside. I went to the front door there, look at northwest, because that's where we get the weather from, especially this time of year. So visibility is short, so there's can't see the horizon, and I think it looks like it might rain, but it's not raining, but it's looking that it might there. But the sun did come out there for a short while there, so that's it. Okay, not to worry. I won't be outside now until later. Expecting some family members here, probably around 2 o'clock. There, and some of the grandchildren want to be playing in the garden. That's enough. So be out and about with them, etc. There. So. And to see how things have grown since the last time they were here. So that's it. Right, Tony, then, back to you then to give a general call out there. I think Niall has gone for a cup of tea, and no, he's there, he's back. Yeah, right, yeah, he's looking at the screen, so he can see what we're doing. So, what do you call it? So back to you, Tony. 7QB from EI, 7HD with company.
Yeah, okay, Echo India 7 Hotel Tango, Echo India 7 Golf Uniform Bravo, the South Dublin Radio Club Net. Yeah, fine, I think Adrian is back there as well. Echo India 9 Hotel Alpha Bravo, Echo India 7 Golf Uniform Bravo. Go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, EI7 GUB from EI9 HAB. Yeah, thanks, Tony. I was just doing that kind of talk that I had pre-prepared. So yeah, back now. And yeah, I don't know if you've had, I think I heard Tony EI7JN there call in, and I don't know which Niall was calling in that Tom was referring to, whether it was Colchester Niall or Niall here in Dublin. But yeah, so back to you, Tony there, EI7GUB.
Yeah, okay, sorry Adrian, Tony 7 Juliet November's there, and Noel Golf 4 Radio Kilo Bravo in Colchester is boy as well. So Adrian, give it back to you and carry on there with Tony and Noel if you want to try, will you?
Yep, okay Tony. Echo India 7 Juliet November from Echo India 9 Hotel Alpha Bravo. How are you this morning, Tony? Over.
Yeah, how you doing? Nice to hear you. Good morning to you. I think keep on busy anyway. Big report for 5-8, 5-7 around there, and all the IQ5 to you at the present time. EI9 Hotel Alpha Bravo, Echo India 7 Juliet November. Over.
Yep, EI7JN from EI9 HAB. I'll copy Tony. A little bit low with me. but I can hear you fine. You're actually about a 4 and 4, just some little bit of difficulty there, and a bit weak. But I think I'm always having that issue pointing towards you anyway. So good to hear you. Hope you've had a good summer, Tony. Over.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, that's great. I was down ready back there last week. We're down in that loan. Prior to that, then was in the Glory Go, and then there's one other involved there. I should have known what it was. Busy staycation, haven't been away overseas. I think next month we'll be getting my greasing up my wings there, and we'll be flying off anyway next September something. And that we did a full part for this year, the lockdown a year and a half ago or whatever. So there you go. Anyway, nice to hear you anyway. Keep up the good work, and I see you're sitting in the office there and getting some sort of response from some stations on the YouTube channel there. So back to you. EI9 Hotel Alpha Bravo from EI7JN number 2, over.
Yep, EI7JN from EI9 HAB. That's good to hear, Tony. Glad you're keeping well. I might try for Niall in Colchester. Golf 4 Radio Kilo Bravo from Echo India 9 Hotel Alpha Bravo. You copy, Niall, over.
Echo India 9 Hotel Alpha Bravo, Golf 4 Radio Kilo Bravo. Now, good morning to you, Adrian. Nice to hear you on this morning, and I'm seeing YouTube as well there. They're about 5.455 at the minute, and well, you did really go with 1 stage of 3 amping as well, so it didn't bring your signal up. So back to you, Adrian. Echo India 9 Hotel Alpha Bravo, Golf 4 Radio Kilo Bravo, South Dublin Radio Club there.
Yeah, G4 RKB from EI9 HAB. Good morning, Niall. Good to hear you. Your signal report for me is about the same, actually. It's about 5455. All.
So back to you, Golf 4 Radio Kilo Bravo. India 7 Kilo Bravo and company, over.
India 7 Kilo November, Golf 4 Radio Kilo Bravo. Dale, Tony, you're still referring to the signal coming in at the moment. I just for a little quick speaker box, sort of get the amp sort of acting alone. But Tony, after the 7 goes to look for Bravo, with the first thing up there, it was a nice clear 5 and 9 in the full system. India 7 Kilo November, both for Radio Kilo Bravo, with a nice silver radio up there.
Yeah, Roger. Okay, Niall. Thank you. Great to hear you anyway, and you're sounding good there. I see that. I just turned on that live streaming at the moment. I'm watching Adrian on the YouTube channel as well there. Anyway, I'll put it back to you, and great to hear you. I put it back to actually Tony, the piece being said, because it's getting close to the 11 o'clock. So EI Golf, EI7 Golf Uniform Bravo from EI7 Kilo November and the group. Go ahead, Tony, take it away.
Right, please.
Yeah, okay, Tony, Echo India 7 Julius November, Echo India 7 Golf Uniform Bravo, the South Dublin Radio.
Okay, sorry about that, folks. Just dropped the signal for a minute, but
Yeah, okay, a very good morning to Paul. I didn't get the calls by that time. I have a bit of QRM here myself, and just I'm finding things a little bit difficult at the minute. It's just, the name here is Tony, Tango Watch for November Yankee, and we're in Dublin City, and the call sign is Echo India 7 Golf Uniform Bravo. Just give us a call sign again, would you?
Okay, this is Golf 0, Mr. Golf Kilo. The name is Paul. I'm in Stafford in the Midlands. They're about 5 and 7. The other station was very, very strong, so I missed his call sign. Back to you.
Okay, Golf 0, Victor Golf Kilo, Echo India 7 Golf Uniform Bravo. Okay, no problems at all. Very good morning.
that's a UK station calling in there. And just that piece of software brought up there a few minutes ago, that's my logging software. So this is you're obliged to keep a log of all radio contacts that you make. It's part of the stipulations of your radio license. So you can see here, these are all my contacts going back here. So anyone who I've direct contact with goes into the log. So that was Niall there, G4RKB, Tony ZI7JN, and I actually have the other guys, Tony and Tom here. I'll add those in. You can add them in later. You can edit this stuff. See if you can get Paul there. That's why the other reason I have a notebook here. You need a notebook really when you're on the radio, because you're listening to call signs. You might not get it the first time. You write it down.
Somewhere around there. We do have another station now, which is also the UK station, but I know we might be too close to it to make contact, but you never know. His call is Golf 4 Radio Kilo Bravo, and his name is Niall, and he's in Colchester. If you'd like to try, give him a call, Paul, please.
So generally the way the net works is that the radio net is that the first person on is in charge, or someone takes charge on through the net, and you could hear Tony there kind of coordinating other operators contacting each other, and that's good because you need to kind of manage the traffic, and what that does, it enables all the stations on the net to contact each other, to see if it's possible, because they're all in different geographic locations, and that's kind of the fun of radio, is that can I get a signal from this place to this place, and can they hear me, and can I hear them.
Golf 4 Radio Kilo Bravo, Golf 0 Victor Golf Kilo. You're about 5 and 7 now, but there's something running really straight over the top of you, or something like that anyway. But just running an old 902 PM. It's 40-year-old, and I think the valves are on the way out, but I think it's giving me about 80 watts, so I can't really complain. Niall, back to you.
Golf 0 Victor Golf Kilo, Golf 4 Radio Kilo Bravo.
So, one of the things I was going to say is about people might be looking at all this radio equipment and going, God, it is expensive, or there's a bit of an outlay involved. Yeah, there is, but you can pick up stuff relatively reasonably second hand. Let's see if I'll get that. Let's see if I can contact Paul here.
I could hear everything you were saying. But I'll bye right now. I'll say cheerio. I'll stand by and wait for the news at 11 o'clock. So thanks to to all of you for letting me in there. Just warm this thing up, and we'll wait for the news. All the best to everybody on frequency from Golf 0 Victor Golf Kilo.
Golf 4 Radio Kilo. That's on the page now for Paul there. We're looking for it. Updated the old order.
Anyway, as I was saying, if we can get the camera right here, the first transceiver I bought was this thing. It's an old. It must be 35 years old. It's a Yaesu FT840, and I got it from an old CB guy who basically messed around inside it and had it as a CB radio, and I think it was 200 quid. be a weak station in there, I think.
So yeah, we're just going to have the microphone back there to Katie. So you sent a copy of for you, but November and then to Victor Golf Kilo. So put the microphone back in front of you so we can sort of get ready for the handover to for the news. So telephone scenario Owen and microphone back to you for the activity 7 Bravo, Golf 4 Radio Kilo Bravo, bye.
Yep, okay, Niall, Golf 4 Radio Kilo Bravo, Echo into 7 Golf Uniform Bravo, the Central Radio Clubnet. Yeah, fine indeed, Niall, I'm just having a listen on the SCR now and I can't hear anything from our end, so I can hear you alright. So there you go. Okay, Tom, do you want to take a look at Echo into 7 Hotel Tango, Echo into 7 Golf Uniform Bravo, maybe just check in with Adrian Rogers?
Yeah, okay, can do, Tony there, no problem. And that station there, Paul, his signal come up there nicely there, and that's good to know that he's going to be on the side listening for the news. So we've only 3 minutes to go there, and Niall also doing a good job. So right, I'll give it over to Adrian there. Adrian, only 3 minutes left there. So back to you from EI7HT.
Yeah, EI7HT from EI9HAB. Yeah, thanks, Tom. I couldn't hear that weaker UK station either, but I could hear Paul, Golf 0 Victor Golf Kilo. I don't know if Paul is still there. If I could, if you come back to me, Golf 0 Victor Golf Kilo from EI9HAB. Are you there, Paul?
Yeah, just copying you, but I'm 5 and 6. It's a bit of a struggle at the moment, but because I've got a bit of splatter. But otherwise, good clear audio. Back to you.
Yeah, Golf 0 Victor Golf Kilo from EI9HAB. Yeah, thanks, Paul. Okay, sorry everybody, the stream dropped there at the end. So if you're still with us, thanks for sticking by after the dropout. Joe, I got your text message. If you want to put a question into the chat now, you can go ahead, that's fine. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap up. So again, sorry guys, thanks for sticking by. I don't know what happened there at the end, the internet dropped out. So the gremlins. So yeah, what am I going to do? Yeah, I just have to update my log here. Get in Tom and Tony. This logging software, by the way, is called log for log LOG. You can see up there F4OM. So OM is old man in amateur radio speak. It means an amateur radio operator. So I'm just going to pop Tom in there and Tony. And so it was Tom, the two Tonys, and so that's the thing. Although just to explain that, although I did hear some of the other stations, I didn't log them because I didn't make contact with them. So just hearing them isn't good enough. You have to have a two-way contact, and you have to exchange the signal report, that 5.9 thing that Sandeep was talking about earlier on. So yeah, so that's that. So what's going on now at the moment is the IRTS news. Now, if I put up the volume there, I can't hear it. I think it's being broadcast from the Midlands, and I don't have a good copy. But what happens at the end of the news is that the newsreader, and this happens in most of the national societies as far as I know, they take a call in. So they're pretty much reading out the news for the amateur radio community for the country or the region for that week. And then anyone who's listening and has a transceiver who's licensed basically call in, and that way the newsreader understands how well the news got out on that particular frequency. But in actual fact, the news is read on 40 meters. It's also read on the 80 meter band, which is around 3 megahertz, or 3000. It's 3,800 kilohertz, 3.8 megs, around there, and it's read on VHF as well, up on. So for the small handheld guys or people who are set up with bigger VHF transceivers, and that's read at various locations around the country. So in actual fact, the news service is there's quite good coverage of the country. But anyway, people call in, and it gives the society and the people who read the news an idea of the listenership and where they're based and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's not online. I think I'm not sure in the UK they might actually put the news. They might stream the news at the same time, considering we live in the internet age. So I think that makes things accessible as well. But anyway, thanks again everybody for joining us this morning. The net wasn't that busy this morning. There wasn't that many callers. There was a few of us from the local group here, but I think it's the end of the second week in August. I think a lot of people are away, don't necessarily have their radios with them, and we might try this again in September. We'll see how it goes. I think it's good to stream the net and some of the activity, because it gives people an idea who haven't got radios yet, or who are interested in the hobby, to kind of understand how it all works. But it also gives us an opportunity to explain some things as well, as to how things work. So if there's nothing else left for the live chat, I don't see anything coming in. I'm gonna sign off. I'll type my sign off in now. Thanks all. I don't know if Joe had a question, because he did. I think he texted me there on the club WhatsApp. But the stream dropped out at the time, so I couldn't get back to him. So that was unfortunate. So you might be wondering, what do we need? What would you need amateur radio for? And you've got phones and the internet and everything. But why? Yeah, it's a good question. I'm asking it to myself. It's actually, for me, it's about there's no intervening infrastructure. It's about you generating your own signal to the world. You know, there's no intermediary node, there's no service provider, there's no it's basically down to your hard work and ingenuity, because everyone's situation is different as to how to get antennas up and stuff like that. And then you're just basically calling out into the dark, right? You're calling out into space, and the people that you contact have probably gone through the same process as you. And there's something magical about, I was on holidays. I took a receiver. I took my older radio with me, and I didn't get the guy, but there was a guy on as clear as a bell from New Zealand, and I just thought that was unbelievable. It was just that signal that got all the way around the planet, and he was talking to a guy in the UK who was actually in a van. What we call a mobile station, and it was unique, and I've had that experience myself. Your first transatlantic contact, your first contact to the southern hemisphere, your first contact via satellite, you know, all through your own kind of bodging around and ingenuity. So it's that's why I find it interesting, you know. Anyway, it's probably the magic of radio. So I'm going to say that's all, folks. And A. Giffen, thanks very much for the text in there on the chat. You're more than welcome. It's a bit look. I'm not a professional radio person or anything like that. As in, this isn't a radio station. But I hope this stuff helps, and we'll try and do it every now and then. It just gives people an idea, as I said. And we'll see you all soon. But don't forget, if you're just listening, we're on Sundays on 7123 kilohertz from usually 9 to 11 up to the Irish Yes News. And if you go to our website, South Dublin Radio Club .ie, you'll see the times for the 2 meter net. You'll get us on Twitter, you'll get us on Facebook, you'll get us, we have the website, and hopefully, I don't know when, but soon, we can get back to the clubhouse on a Tuesday night and meet again in person, because it's nearly 2 years, coming up to 2 years now at this stage, isn't it? Well, at least a year and a half anyway. Thanks for coming along. So, my name is Adrian, call sign Echo India 9, Hotel Alpha Bravo of the South Dublin Radio Club, and I'm going to sign off now. Have a good Sunday, and we'll talk to you soon. And as they say in Radio 7.3.